Well, good day, folks. Welcome back. Today, we're in our second episode of our Discipleship Reframed series. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brandon. Excited to be here.
Right on. I'm doing well. It's a beautiful sunny day today. Well, just as a reminder, last week we talked really about a global view of the Discipleship Reframed and talking about the crisis that the church is kind of in with COVID going on, the social unrest, and really understanding that maybe we didn't quite get here overnight. And that was a large talk of what we had, that there are youth that are growing up in the church, but once they make it into college, they're falling away from the faith, where the largest growing kind of self-identifying are these nuns that are
Yep.
not attached to any kind of faith. Christianity is kind of the church is in decline as far as membership. I know in the Catholic Church they're even having problems finding clergy and others to be priests. There's just not enough in there. So there's this kind of this crisis that we're seeing not only in America but in a global sense with the church, John. But if well, as we move into the second part of the DR, really what we want to focus on is what's the purpose of the discipleship reframe as it relates to church leaders, and with that we see the crisis of the church, but what is the crisis that the leaders of those churches might be feeling, the pastors and the other lay leaders that are in charge, John? What have you noticed and seen recently in your time of how those leaders are experiencing this?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brandon. What comes to my mind is that if I watch the Seahawks on Sunday struggle, one of my first questions is, what's Pete Carroll going to do? How's he going to respond? And so we have this natural connection between the state of the church and the state of its leaders. And my sense is that their pastors are kind of all over the board in some ways, but if you read, books on that are being written for pastors, you get a sense that there's a deep sense in a lot of pastors of maybe questioning. I've been trained to do it this way. This way used to work, but now I'm not really sure it's working anymore. Pastors that are looking at their members who might only be coming, once a month to church, things that used to quote unquote work no longer seem to be having the same impact. Numbers are there's churches that are closing their doors. And in some cases, the church is getting older and grayer. You hear that a lot. It's not attractive to young people. How do we attract a generation that seems to be checked? So there is a sense of not being confident. They have the tools necessarily to be and to implement a way of doing church that will meet needs and draw people in. And I think you can read a book, you can try a new strategy, do what this church tried, but in the end, I think it's not moving towards a strong sense of confidence and success. And I think the COVID crisis, in some ways, is a twofold thing, Brandon. On the one hand, it's bringing a sense of disruption, of openness, of recognition that we may have to change, but it also brings with it some new challenges. Just how do we keep the old church going? I had the one pastor say that first we have to ask the question, now what do we do? Oh my gosh, we can't meet, so what the first thing we got to do is put church online. That's the immediate thing, and put disinfection policies into place, etc. But then there's the next question, which is, okay, are we going to move our small groups to online? Are we going to, the whole moving into this extended season and making some adaptations. But then the challenge is to go from now to next and to new. And I think this is, you hear this all the time, that there's going to be a new normal. But how do we get from where we are to this new normal, knowing that it might require some repentance, like a turning away from some things, letting go of some things, relearning some things. And we like to use the language of, kind of to reframe something, that is the challenge of going forward.
Yeah, John, I gotta agree with you in that, and even just my own sense of realizing that the time that we're in is extremely crucial, and I think we're in a history-changing moment, and there's this danger that I feel that we could slip back into this idea of rebooting, where we're just going to kind of hunker down and hold out until this storm passes, and then we'll reboot everything that we used to do, and we'll just go back to life as normal. When I feel that God is doing something different. And the other thing that we could do is recalibrate. And in that sense, I think there's this understanding that something's off. We're off kilter a little bit.
Right.
We realize there's error, but let's figure out where the error is and just adjust a little bit and get back aligned with kind of original thinking. And what you're proposing here is there's a reframing, kind of a different perspective
Yep.
of the way these things of the way these things fit together. I think that's great. Could you give us a little bit more about what you mean by reframing in this sense?
Well, I think, when I had a friend who a couple years ago bought a house that literally was taken down to the studs, and then they couldn't finish, so they sold it. So anyway, he went in and completely redid the floor plan, Brandon, and added a second floor, some things that weren't there before. And so when you that kind of a remodel is so different than just touching up the paint or changing the floor, and so I think what we're looking at here, when we talk about the discipleship reframed, is taking, a look at the church going down to the studs. Why do we do what we do? Has it been working? Is it aligned with what Christ's priority? And then being willing to kind of make a frame, that would really represent a more what we would hope to be a more effective approach, to making disciples. Again, the idea of a frame, of course, is not that everybody would do it the same way, right? That churches would all look alike, but that there would be a sense that we have gone down, we've made some unnecessary changes, and we've got a framework. That's kind of what would come out of reframing, that we can lean into and make specific strategies and tactics towards a culture of discipleship. And I think that's going to that takes more time and more effort than most of us have given to rethinking the vision of our churches. And I just think of examples in cultures like football or sports, where people like Russell Wilson, I'm a Seahawks person out here in the Northwest, but we all watched him doing another miracle this last Sunday. And the effort that he had to go through over the last months, and working with his receivers, and practicing and understanding the opponent and watching game films and being willing to adjust his approach, that for me is kind of a model of what the intensity of the church and our leadership now, as we think about reframing and becoming more intentional about transformation in the future.
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, you're really talking about a large scale understanding of reframing the way we do church, and really kind of changing the priority of it. What comes to mind for me is just form and function in architecture. That an architect wants to know what the function of the building is, and then it builds its form to fit it best.
Yep.
And it seems right now where we've almost framed around the wrong idea, or maybe almost a misdefined idea of this. And we're talking about discipleship and reframing here, and discipleship is a word that's thrown around in the church world all over the place. I mean, and Jesus obviously chose his 12 disciples that he had. Discipleship is really what we're supposed to do. We understand that disciples are meant to look like the teacher, that they follow, they
Yep.
do those types of things. But for the sake of everyone who's listening to this, how would you say Kingdom Story defines discipleship, and how are we really going to look at it as it relates to the discipleship reframed?
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think part of the importance of your question, Brandon, is that you have to know what the goal is to be able to evaluate whether you're successful. And so, yeah, a word like discipleship, like the word love or whatever, can have so many different meanings. And so, yeah, let's do that. And the way we've described it, and we've got, whether in different countries, I've been in China and Africa and different American pastors, no one's struggled with this. It seems to capture what everybody can say that I've exposed this to, is that, yeah, I agree with that. And that, here it is: discipleship is the lifelong process of becoming like Jesus in every way and helping others to do the same. And each of those words leaves a lot of room for for a specific expression, Brandon. But there are things that you can hang your perspective of church on. One is that discipleship is a process, right? So it's not a formula, it's not a program. If you do this program, that's discipleship. A process will include programs, but it's messy, it's interactive. You look at the life of Jesus, it's a process, and it's lifelong. It's not something that you just do for the first year you join the church, or during your youth years, or the first couple of years of after you make a commitment. It's like the process of growing as a human being. It's lifelong, and that has huge implications. And then the goal is to become like Jesus. So becoming, we are changing. It's a transforming thing, and it's like Jesus, that he is our model, that we're going to look to him and what he valued and what was important in his life and teachings. That's the goal, that like Christ. And so in every way, that where again, it's more than just the mind, it's and how we think or taking classes, it's more than just the heart and what we feel, it's more than just our behavior, it's all of these spheres of life that we want to become like Christ. And then the last part of the definition, Brandon, is just helping others to do the same. As disciples make disciples. It's like people grow up and then they have children, and that's the, for most of us, that's kind of the experience. That's how the world gets repopulated, right?
Mm.
And so the expectation is that if you've been given something, you can give it away, that you can help others. And so the lifelong process of becoming like Jesus in every way and helping others to do the same.
Wow, that's I love that definition, John, as we've thought about it. And there's so many parts, as you said, to continue to unpack. And for me as a disciple, for us as leaders that we're sitting there, I think that it's a really good step in the next place to see how am I doing in that. And kind of the word we've used for this is about a diagnosis. And I think some of us get a little afraid. I mean, when we think about a diagnosis, when it comes to our health and whatnot, but I think it's a good time
Mm.
for us to take an honest look at what it might mean to diagnose our church and our own selves, and kind of how it relates to this definition. If this is the goal, if this is the place that we're going, how am I doing in that? And so how do you how are we going to walk through that? How do you explain that from the kingdom story point? Is in this next place, how might we take an honest look at ourselves?
Yeah. Well, and thank that's, I think that's really an important part of where we want to start, Brandon. I think you could use an example of somebody who has just this general sense that something in their body isn't feeling well, kind of an ache and a pain, or their heart isn't beating quite the same normal way, and there are different responses to that I can see, whether it's pastors or churches, is, oh, well, I don't like the doctor. I just want to keep going and pretend that nothing's wrong, right? So they don't even go in. But then there are people who only will go to the doctor when they're on their deathbed, right? So in some ways, the church, there can be a tendency that we're really not going to take a deep, honest look at a diagnosis and look under every rug and every board to say what's really going on underneath the surface, until it's just like it's a crisis. And then there are people, and this is where, I hope that this is where some of us, where that something's going on, and before you wait until it's too late, you trust the doctor enough, you trust the process to go in. And when that happens, the doctor then has the opportunity, the great physician, which we'll see as God here, has the opportunity to give you a chance to, you get that clipboard at the beginning to check the boxes and what's going on. I want to know, I'm going to take your pulse, and I'm going to look at your blood pressure. I'm going to look for symptoms that can help me then get to the root of the issue, so I can really know how to help you. And so one of the questions, of course, for us is, what does it mean to take the pulse of the church? How do we know? What are the signs that a church is healthy? And I think what we're going to do in the Discipleship Reframed approach is to take a look at some of the things that were so essential to Jesus's life that we ought to look for them in ourselves if we're becoming more like him. So, for example, Jesus loved God with all of his heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then invited us to do the same. So we could look at a church, Brandon, and say, what are the signs in our church that people over time in a lifelong process are giving more and more of their devotion and their love to God than to anything else? That would be a sign of health. Maybe influencing the world. Are the people, Jesus, everywhere he went, he made a difference in the world. What about the folks, as they move from our church pews and chairs into neighborhoods, into their workplace? Are we making a difference? Is God using us to to fundamentally become salt and light. And so that's where I think we need to just take some time and deepen the diagnosis before then we can really get a sense of where do we go from here.
Yeah, John. I think really grasping this idea of, not only having the measurables of our people growing in their love for God, but then taking that honest look and looking back and saying, if are the words that are coming out of our people's mouth uplifting, and if not, why not?
Right.
How are they acting on social media? How are our people serving, or are they simply attending on Sunday morning, or seeing us online? Are people getting healed, or are they still just as angry as they were when they came
Right.
in 20 years
Oh,
ago?
yeah. And how are we treating our kids in our homes? We get them all dressed up to go to church when we could go to church, right? But maybe at the home there's a completely different way that we behave with our spouses, and it goes on and on. Our addictions to pornography as men, to our passivity with video games, etc. Are we fundamentally being transformed from those places, to love God and to commit ourselves to the community, to show up for church, as our community on a regular basis instead of occasional? There's just signs, right, that something might be going on deeper. And to take a closer look will get us closer than to saying, where do we go from here, and how can Jesus's life motivate us to make disciples in the 21st century?
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, John. I mean, this is a hard topic really to talk about, to take an honest look at the church. And I think most times people would try to end on this huge positive uptick, and not that there isn't a positive uptick, but I think there's a benefit to the weight of us sitting in this place and really kind of understanding, where are we, in this, and can we take an honest look at reframing some of these things? Can we look at the symptoms of of what's going on in our church, and really be challenged as to what God is doing in this? And the next week we come on and we discuss, we're going to get a little deeper into how we identify some of the symptoms, these things, and how we might be able to grow towards a fullness, right? Is that what we do? Talk about relationship.
Yeah, the sessions ahead will definitely take a closer look at the diagnosis, at what we're doing and what impact it's making, and how we arrived at doing church the way we have. And then that'll begin to launch us towards a very fresh look at the life of Jesus, and how we might create a culture of discipleship in our churches.
Mm-hmm. And so my prayer for those listening is just that, to take your prayer to God, and to feel the weight of this, and to really take an honest assessment. We all need it, and I think God wants to bring us towards transformation. John, thank you for all that you shared today.
It's been good.
Yeah, to lean into this idea of diagnosing and understanding just the crisis that we might be in, not trying to work harder, but let's work smarter and reframe this thing, and God doing something new.
And yeah, for sure, Brandon, we don't have all the answers, and this seminar isn't, a 100% foolproof, formula, but we are excited about the conversation and to be in it with others as we explore this together, because we're all in it together. So I'm excited as a learner, as well as a facilitator, to be in this.
Yeah. Well, we thank everybody for joining us. We pray for your continued resolve and your steadfastness in this. Keep going after it. We love you. We thank you guys for joining us. And just remember that John and I are both just two disciples.
Yep. And trying to find our place in God's story. Yep.
Take care, everyone. See you later.
Thanks again, Brandon.